Hello, everyone. Welcome to Room for Discussion. Today, we will resume our series on Israel-Palestine. In December, we have already talked about the different experiences of the conflict with the Palestinian journalist Taghreed El-Khodary and with the Israeli writer Yossi Klein Halevi. This Sunday, a ceasefire deal has stopped the fighting in Gaza and has until now led to the release of 3 Israeli hostages and up until now of 90 Palestinian prisoners. As events are currently unfolding, we want to speak to academics to put those events into a broader context.
Our guest today is Nadim Rouhana. He's a professor of international affairs and conflict studies at Tufts University. Born in Haifa to a Palestinian family, he has experienced the current conflict firsthand, making Israeli-Palestinian relations one of the focal points of his work. Today, we will discuss the concepts he uses to investigate the conflict and reflect on the frameworks he designed for a more equitable future in Israel-Palestine.
So we are first going to talk about more conceptually the conflict and its understanding. Then we are going to move on to more practical possibilities for rapprochement. And last week, we are going to look into the future. So my name is Elizabeth.
And I'm Gabe.
And now let us give a warm applause for Nadim Rouhana. Nadim, we are very happy to welcome you to Room for Discussion today. You are born and grew up in Esfiyeh, actually, which is close to Haifa. This is a village where people from different religions and ethnicities, among them Druze, Palestinian, Christians, Muslims, also a few Jewish people live together. How do you look back at growing up there?
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for this. Well, I mean, I was born after Israel was established, so naturally, I'm an Israeli citizen. During the Nakba War, what's known as the Nakba War, actually, my community was about to be kicked out from Asifia. And it is, I mean, I'm saying this in public, it's the oral history of the place, it's well known. It's the Druze community that protected the other communities in the town from being kicked out, because at the time, for historical reasons, the Druze did have some kind of relationship with with the Jewish forces, with the Zionists and so on. But I grew up under the control of the Israeli system, going through the educational system. Was fortunate to go to one of the very, very few private schools in Haifa that was established by the Christian Orthodox, or the remnants of the Christian Orthodox community in Haifa, but was open to all, to all students from all over the country. And indeed, students from all over the country came to it. And then I went to Haifa University, and throughout my growing up, I learned that I am in a state, in a settler colonial state for people who are not like me, although we are the native people of the country, of the place. And this is how my writing and research really focused on that.
So was there a specific moment in your childhood that you recognized that your own identity somewhat conflicted with the identity of the state you were living in?
Well, I don't know if conflated, but remember, we are talking about 1948, when, I mean, after 1948, the 50s, and that's after the major part of the Palestinians were expelled out of Palestine. So you have really the remnants of the Palestinian people staying in the part of Palestine that became Israel. I mean, it was hard to have schools. It was hard to have people who are qualified to teach, and so on. We started learning Hebrew early on, English later, but then the encounter with the Jewish society, let's say, was more in the school in Haifa. I was in that school. I was in boarding school, and it was in a Jewish neighborhood. So any manifestation of Arab identity was kind of controlled, although our educators and teachers were very, very well aware of what's happening. The educational system was completely controlled. They determine what kind of literature you study, of course. So I studied the Hebrew literature, Bialik, and so on. People from Russia who are dreaming about coming to Palestine and so on, and the other main Jewish literary figures, the Bible, of course, in Hebrew, and although yeah, and so on. And in Arabic, it was the history and literature that does not relate to any aspects of what happened in Palestine between the Palestinians and the Zionist movement, how Israel was established, except for the Israeli narrative, of course. So that was something. Whatever, excuse me, whatever we learned from outside of school, hinting here and there, but being under the full control of the Israeli system, and so on. And then when I went to the university, Haifa University, I was active with the students. The political education really took place.
Before we are going more into your work specifically, we wanted to ask you, we can imagine that it's quite difficult after everything that has happened in the last 16 months to theorize about the conflict or think about things in an abstract way, which is what you do in your work. So how do you manage to take this more abstract perspective while being so deeply impacted emotionally by current events as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like all Palestinians, like many Arabs, it's a devastating experience, particularly watching that. I mean, to the extent that you cannot watch it all the time. I mean, it's a genocide that's broadcast live on the Arab channels, right? Uh, it is very hard. It is very hard for me in the U.S. to see the American media, which is more than complicit with the Israeli narrative, more than complicit. I think it's really sometimes they are, if I want to use, what term shall I use? I mean, they are more into the Israeli narrative than some of the Israeli media. But at the same time, for people like me, where I mean, also the positionality, it was it was very important to see the student movement and the movement of the new generations all over Europe and in this country in particular, and in my university and in my school. You see, so that was very good. That means that although the official Western, well, not all of them, of course, talking US, Germany, UK, France, although they were complicit with the genocide, particularly the US government, people are asking questions, are not accepting that. And students in universities, as you know. So that was very, very important to see. But at the same time, uh, the what happened in this genocide, it really like give me liberty or give me genocide. It showed that this is a settler colonial project. It wants to eliminate the Palestinians one way or the another, either in ethnic cleansing, or when ethnic cleansing didn't work and full control didn't work, it went to genocide in the service of Jewish superiority or supremacy, let's say, in the whole area. And what this war made it clear is that until now, Israel would not stop at any place to establish this supremacy, given the internal also politics in Israel and the rise, the continuous, almost linear rise of the right wing, and the failure of the genocide in kicking the Palestinians out of Gaza and finishing the Palestinians. So this is a moment in history where the question should be, can we have a system that is based on ethnic supremacy? Can we accept a system that is based on ethnic supremacy? And what is our responsibility as an international community, not only to prevent a genocide that we failed to prevent, but at least from now on to continue, but also to deal with this system. And if you want, if you want, I can at some point, I mean, show you, talk to you about how the system is really fundamentally from its establishment on even before, right, is founded on Jewish supremacy. What is the meaning of people coming from outside of Palestine to take the place over, not to live with the natives, not to be equal with the natives, but to have an exclusive state for themselves in a place that's inhabited by people, right?
Yeah.
So this is what this experience is showing.
When we talk about that supremacy in your work, you talk extensively about Palestinians in Israel, and also about what you call the constitutional contradiction that the state of Israel has, namely that it defines itself as both a Jewish and a democratic state. Could you elaborate on this contradiction?
Yes. I mean, as you know, the movement in Israel before the genocide started, with the judicial system and people going out in the streets, they wanted to maintain what they called Israel as Jewish and democratic. Jewish and Jewish and democratic is a fallacy. How can a state be defined as the state of the Jewish people when it's 26% of its population are non-Jews? About, depending how how you count is very complicated. About 19%. Do you count people without, like, like East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem, and so on? But about 20% are Palestinians. This is the state of the Jewish people, where by constitutional law, the nationality law that was passed a couple of years ago, that the right of self-determination is only for the Jewish people, right? In Israel itself, Israel, when I say Israel, it's 1967 borders, but also in the whole area of Palestine, from the river to the sea. The only right of the right of self-determination is only for the Jewish people. If you want to run for the Knesset, for the parliament, you cannot challenge that. If you say no, Israel should be the state of its citizens, that's a democratic state, right? I mean, that's the ABC of democratic state. you will not be allowed to run for the Knesset, right? So so there are more than 50 laws. I can refer you to a website, Adala, it's called ADALAH. More than 50 laws that discriminate against Palestinians in every aspect of life. This is a state that you feel from the minute you get in the land that it's not for somebody like me, that it's not for you. Well, how and democracy is based on equality. Equality is not part of the Israeli political system. There were some attempts to anchor equality into constitutional law. The Knesset did not even allow the proposal to be discussed in the Knesset. So democracy is a fallacy. Israel, in my mind, is a state of democracy of masters. Herrenvolk democracy, in the name of one actually Netherlands scholar that talked about South Africa, but in a different sense. These are the masters of the land, and we are there. My last sentence on this would be that the differences between the left, what's called the left, and the right in Israel in how to treat the Palestinians is how how good you want to be to them as people in the state of the Jewish people, right? As a group in the state of the Jewish people. This is really a democracy of masters. We are the masters. We have supremacy, the Jewish people, and we tolerate the Palestinian citizens. We give them some rights. Yes, we do give them some rights, but when there is any challenge to the identity of the state, we know how to stop that.
Yeah. Well, whilst I agree that this, like the general spectrum from left to right in Israel, indeed is very different and more shifted to the right, there is, I would say, at least some people who do also disagree and yeah, who believe that there should be proper equality. Now, more recently in your work, as you've already said, you have taken over the lens of colonialism, specifically settler colonialism, to understand the conflict. Could you explain to us how that helps understanding the reality on the ground?
Yes, absolutely. But Elizabeth, let me say this. I mean, I really want to be clear about left and right in Israel. There is not one party in the Zionist spectrum, left or right, that would seek equality in a state for its citizens. That this homeland is the homeland of Palestinians, Palestinian Arabs, Palestinians, and Jews. There's not one party. I'm sorry to be that blunt, but that is the case. The difference between the left and the right is that the left, quote unquote, would offer Arabs a little more rights and treat them a little better as basically guests in the homeland of the Jewish people. That is fundamental. That is very important to understand. Now, in terms of settler colonialism, again, I mean, in order to understand the essence of the relationship between Arab and Jew in the country, we have to frame it one way or another. And I think the most relevant and appropriate theoretical frame is the settler colonial frame, which talks about settler colonial states such as the US, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Algiers under the French, as a system in which people come from the outside to take the place over, right? They are not They are not, and they establish a structure of dominance and supremacy vis-a-vis the natives. Now, in some places, like regular, normal colonialism, India, let's say, it's for exploitation, right? You exploit the resources for economic reasons. But in settler colonialism, you came to stay. The settler comes to stay, and the settler comes to take over, and the settler comes not to live equally with the native. This is exactly what happened in Zionism. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. Read Zionist literature. This is what they talk about, right? They are coming to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. What's the definition of Zionism? This is the definition of Zionism, is establishing a Jewish state on Palestine. The structure of the Jewish state, the constitutional structure of the Jewish state, is a structure of supremacy. And in order to be a Jewish state, how can it be a Jewish state when you have Palestinian population? 1948, you did ethnic cleansing. Then you closed the borders hermetically, not allowing Palestinians to come back, taking their lands, properties, cities, everything, right? So I think that is the essence for understanding the relationship between Jews and Israeli Jews and or Zionists, for that matter, and Palestinians. Now, I think the challenge is to how to undo that. How to undo that is to the the main thing is to have equality. There's no question about that. Decolonization means equality and few other things. But this is the system that is accepted, incidentally, increasingly in the last 20 years in also in Western academia, right? And there are many people who wrote about that, as you know, and writing about that. This is the description of the structure of the relationship between Jew and Arab in all over Palestine.
Yeah, that is also interesting because often in your work you refer to the power asymmetry that is present in Israeli-Palestinian relations, and you criticize conflict studies also because they symmetrize the conflict. Could you further explain how this imbalance appears in reality?
Yes, absolutely. As a student of conflict studies, I found that Western conflict studies and what's called conflict resolution and so on usually symmetricizes the relationship between two parties who are not of equal power and ignores the question of power in the relationship. So when you come to mediation, when you come to negotiation, when you come to describing the relationship, you ignore the basic fundamental component of the relationship, that of power asymmetry, in our case of domination. Palestinians, as you know, are completely dominated by the Israelis. I mean, in Gaza, they were put in prison, right? No access to the outside world. In the West Bank, they are under full control of the Israeli military and the settlers and so on, they can take their land anytime. And in Israel, actually, the citizenship in Israel, I described it in my writings as settler colonial citizenship. It's citizenship that emerged out of that system of domination. So the point is that conflict resolution ignores that. And I wasn't very happy with that. They describe both parties with similar processes and so on. You have to read recent reports of, mediation between, even the American mediation between Israelis and Palestinians, like in Camp David II and other efforts. And the criticism, I mean, people are starting to internalize that. When, as you know, the whole work on negotiation, a major project started here in Boston at Harvard, And the main people who worked on that did not even consider the question of power. It was people from the third world like me, and I mean, I'm not talking about myself, but talking about people from the third world, to tell them you can't talk about theories of international negotiation without bringing in the power asymmetry. So, and I think the field is more open to that now, particularly from European work, and more increasingly here too.
Yeah, so actually you have worked in the more traditional understanding of conflict resolution before, and then changed your approach, right? Or made clear that conflict resolution as that is less applicable to settler colonial contexts. And now you're arguing to take into account power asymmetry and concepts such as historical responsibility and social justice. But I'm wondering, these are very, like big concepts. How do you include them in a framework in practice?
Yes, I mean, this is really a very, very important and hard question. As you know, I was involved in a project that's called problem solving workshops, in which we brought together Israeli and Palestinian high ranking, let's say, individuals from academia, media, government, but not in the government, previous or future, so they can be themselves without government instructions, to talk about, the needs of both communities, political needs, of course, and to think about how to find a shape of an arrangement that responds to both needs. And I think, I did that in the 90s and so on. And at that time, the conceptual approach was really the approach of a conflict between two national movements, and the idea of two-state solution as the way forward. I gradually realized that in a settler colonial context, and in context of mass atrocities and ethnic cleansing and crimes and so on, this is not the most appropriate approach. I think this approach should come later, after there is a recognition by the parties, in this case, if you are talking about Israel-Palestine, of the Israelis, of the history, what happened, how did that happen, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the right of Palestinians in that land that should be equal to the right of Israeli Jews, right? And so in that sense, I don't think the question of justice. So people avoid the question of justice. I'll tell you how they avoid it, by saying, listen, it's very hard to define justice. I'm sorry, it might be hard to define justice, but there is international law as your fallback option for thinking about a just solution. Why don't we go to international law? Why do we ignore, as happens after the genocide in Gaza, that the whole system of international law is under threat, right? Is being challenged, and the international organizations, and historical responsibilities, and so on. So how do you do that? I don't think you do that in workshops of conflict resolution, frankly, by bringing people from the mainstream of both sides to talk about it, which we did. I think you do that by bringing people who are critical, who look into the history with penetrating lens of understanding what happened, by examining together what happened and how it happened, and the responsibility, the issue of responsibility, the issue of recognizing history, and then thinking together for a way forward. And once you have that, And if you have the parties accepting that, then you have problem-solving workshops on how to proceed. But without that foundation of, of recognizing what happened, right? What's the problem-solving workshop? I mean, you bring people who tell you this is the land of the Jewish people, and people who tell you this is not the land of the Jewish people. What are you going to be arguing? What are you going to
Yeah.
be discussing, right?
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so, I think it's a major challenge. And I think before going into this issue of problem solving and so on, we have to do the intellectual work of understanding and framing what happened and what is the situation now.
Yeah, these are very relevant questions. And building on that, we would like to open up the floor to our first round of audience questions.
Yeah.
If someone could bring the mic over there.
Like you said earlier, the essence of Zionism is essentially that a Jewish state is necessary in order to ensure Jewish security. But you also mentioned that your solution would be decolonization. So, my question for you is how can we achieve this goal and ensure self determination for everybody, but while also appeasing the Zionists and providing this feeling of safety and security for the Jews?
Yeah, I mean, I can refer you, of course, to some of my writings about that and so on. Yes, I mean, the one part of the Zionist project is to seek safety for the Jews after their horrifying experience in Europe, right? Even before the Holocaust, right? Certainly culminating in the Holocaust. But the Zionist project started before. I think the Jewish leadership did have the responsibility to think about how to get rid of the discrimination and maltreatment and the violence against them and all of that. But the minute now, how to do that is, I mean, you can do that. You are in Europe, right? This started in Europe. So why don't you do it in Europe? The minute you decided to have a safe homeland, that's also great. But the minute you decided to have that safe homeland in the homeland of another nation, that becomes immediately settler colonialism. As you know, the Zionist movement considered many other places in the world, including Uganda. So if they did go to Uganda, it would have been the same experience. The only difference would be that when the Ugandans fight them, like they did fight other settlers, like Africans fought other settlers, they can't claim this is the land that God gave us. So this claim that the land gave us this land, well, I don't know how many thousand years ago, is there's something narcissistic in it, and you know you are oblivious to the existence of others in that land for 2,000 years, right? I'm coming back as if that land has been there waiting for me to take it over. So how do I do that? I'm sorry, I would have addressed you by name, but I didn't get your name. But how do you do that? You say that this land, from the river to the sea, which has equal numbers of of Jews and Palestinians, incidentally, almost equal numbers, that's without Palestinian refugees, is the homeland of two national groups, the Israeli Jewish group and the Palestinians. And these people, first of all, this is why I'm talking about when I talk about the intellectual legwork, infrastructural work, that if you accept that idea, then the question becomes how to implement it. And that's a political, international, intellectual, academic project that we all should be involved in. But first, we have to say that in this land, there is a place for two peoples. The Israeli Jewish people I'm talking about, not the Jewish people, incidentally. The Israeli Jewish people and the Palestinian people to live in that land equally. And they define together how the self-determination will take shape. 2 states, 1 state, autonomous regions. I mean, there are multiple possibilities. The guiding principle should be clear, my friends. Without that guiding, what is happening in Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank, is because the guiding principle of Zionism is that this is the land of the Jewish people. Right? How do you do that? Tell me, how can you have that without treating the Palestinians like treating them? So I would start decolonization with that principle. With that is, if there is a mutual recognition, which, you know, when you deal in conflict resolution and so on, of mutual recognition, let Israelis and Palestinians recognize each other. That's really how should I describe it? Recognize what? I want mutual recognition where both parties recognize the right of each other to live together equally. That's the defining principle.
Thank you very much for your audience question. Now, we've said it also already in the introduction of the interview. Just this weekend, a ceasefire deal has been voted through by the Israeli cabinet, with the agreement having gone into effect on Sunday. The situation right now is very dynamic, and there is no guarantee that the deal will hold. And no one knows how the process will unfold further. In your opinion, what do you think is needed right now for just the next steps of this ceasefire deal to develop successfully?
Well, I think it's fantastic that we did have a ceasefire. There is, of course, in the literature, some discussion about how this came about. And in my view, it came about because of finally there was, you know, whatever we think about Trump in other areas, if you saw the inauguration yesterday, it's a major issue. But because Trump was willing, was able to put some pressure on the Israelis, and because the Israelis were also not doing well in their project of ethnic cleansing in northern Gaza and suffering some casualties, and there was pressure from inside Israel. I think the thing to do is to continue with the 3 stages of the ceasefire, which means continue after the 42 days and complete the exchange of hostages and Palestinian prisoners. Many of them are hostages, incidentally. We don't call them hostages because this is the power dynamics. I mean, there are some people taking out from their homes by force, by the force of a state, not by a force of a military group, by a state, taking them in prison and putting them under arrest without accusation, incidentally. As you know, about 30% of prisoners have no accusation whatsoever, right? So they're basically, I mean, you can think about them as kidnapped. So exchange of prisoners and hostages, establishing the ceasefire. And I think the 3rd stage should be starting to think about the future. But I think to put Gaza under the same conditions that it suffered until October 7, of being besieged, of being under full control from land, sea, and air by the Israelis, and on the Egyptian side by the Egyptians too, and to control movement and whatever comes in and the amount of food that comes in before October 7, I think this is inhuman and unacceptable. I think the world, we, you, us, me, all of us, should not accept that. We should think about how to deal with that. And of course, it's very important to think about lifting the siege on Gaza and, as you know, and start thinking about the future. Now, there is this international discussion about two-state solution. Why not? We can try it. Why don't we try that? I mean, I can talk to you if you want at some point what might be the problem with that, but I think the system of occupation and domination has to be terminated. Now, the format of that, I mean, if the world wants to try two-state solution, it seems that in the short run might be the easiest way to go ahead. That is fine.
Now, also, just as the basis of a two-state solution, or indeed also a one-state solution, what would be needed is what you have said, like very early on, regarding the Israelis and acceptance that Palestinians also consider this place their homeland and should have self-determination there. And the similar thing would also be necessary among all Palestinians, because as of right now, there's also groups such as Hamas who don't accept the presence of Jewish people there. How do you think, especially in the situation right now, where there is a lot of extremism or more radicality on both sides, understandably, how can one move more together with regards to these convictions?
Yes, yes. Yes, I just want to clarify one very important point, and then and then try to answer your very hard and good question. You know, both sides have to agree that this homeland is homeland for two peoples, right?
Exactly.
Now, if you have two-state solution, Israel, as you know, demanded actually in the negotiation from the Palestinian to recognize it. That's when they were playing the game of negotiation. They stopped playing even that game, saying, there are no partners and so on, because they wanted the whole land. Now, the two-state solution, they wanted the Palestinians to recognize Israel as the state of the Jewish people. And that comes at the expense of the whole Palestinians, but practically at the expense of Palestinians inside Israel, because they will be living in a state that's not theirs. That's very hard. If we leave this issue aside to the future, where the two communities together define the future of the state, I think two-state solution might be an option. Now, how to do that? I think the international community has to take responsibility. I think the international community, by letting Israel behave the way it has been behaving for the last, whatever, 50, 60 years, 75 years, with impunity, doing whatever it wants, allowing Israel to do what it's doing in the West Bank and Gaza before October 7 and after October 7, that's an international responsibility. So I don't know how the international system can move in that direction. This is a very, very hard and long project. I think it's for people like us, like you, the young generation, who understands the essence of this, to push, right? It's not that the Netherlands government tomorrow is going to change, or the governments in Europe or in the US. But this is very important, to have the public opinion pushing in the direction of justice, equality. These are principles that we all agree upon. And in the direction of two-state solution. Now, if you want me to talk diplomatically and so on, I can talk about that. Trump, for example, probably would want to integrate Israel in the region by having a deal with Saudi Arabia. And the issue is to how much Saudi Arabia is willing to do that without having Israel making major concessions in the direction of a Palestinian state. This is what's on the table, what will be on the table diplomatically for the next couple of years. But unfortunately, I'm in a school of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I have to say that the American diplomacy has been a spectacular failure, right? To be unable to stop a genocide and actually to be accomplice with a genocide. So, so this is, I mean, this thing that I described with it seems to be that the Trump administration, even with the very many people who are openly Zionists, right? They describe themselves as such, right? And pro-Israel, of course. So even with that, he might, he's a different bird, kind of bird. He might want to seek an arrangement for Israel to be integrated with Saudi Arabia, but and then having the regional American hegemonic control of the region, but Saudi Arabia, the debate is how much Saudi Arabia is committed to seek the implementation of steps towards a two-state solution. This is, I think, what's diplomatically. I personally think it's very hard for. I think that Netanyahu and some of his entourage, his group, want to go back to the genocidal war. But I frankly think, with what's happening, it might be hard. And if the three steps of the ceasefire are implemented, I think the diplomatic effort will be in the direction that I just described.
Right.
And Europe has to play a more major role, but it depends again on the public opinion. We know what's happening in the Netherlands and so on. So with public opinion showing some more enthusiasm and support for justice and equality and human rights and so.
Yeah, building on this incredibly complex topic of this vision of the future, we would like to open up the floor now to the last round of audience question. So if anyone wants to...
Yeah, we have quite some. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, first the gentleman with the...
Hi, I'm Johar from Israel, which makes me also Palestinian. Actually, I am Palestinian, but I have to say that I'm Israeli all the time. So we share some things together, and we share like the things that we did when we were younger, when we were in Israel. And for that, I wanted to ask you a question about the Jewish perspective of the Palestinian Israelis in Israel, and at the same time, the perspective of the Jewish Israelis to the Palestinian in the West Bank and Gaza. What do you think the main obstacle for them to why they're not recognizing that they're seeing us less human or they're treating us like this? Yes.
Thank you, Joe. Listen, I might sound, at the risk of sounding like a broken record. It is the supremacy. If this is the land of the Jewish people, I don't know your background, Joe, or you say we share some things and so on. Then, then they are the masters of the land. Incidentally, before the recent elections, the recent elections, before there were, as you know, there are two very extreme parties. Ben Gvir, who just left the government because he wanted the war to continue. His slogan was, "We are the masters. We will show you that we are the masters," to the Palestinians in Israel. So, with that attitude, of course, that's the extreme right. But as I told Elizabeth in an answer to her comments, the left doesn't. The left says that more gently. They say we have to deal with the concept of ger, the stranger that comes from the Bible, nicely, because the Bible teaches us to do that. But we are not strangers there, right? So I think that's the essence of it. Now, in the West Bank, the story is a little more complicated in the sense that since 1967 until now, the new generation doesn't even recognize that these lands are occupied. Now, to say that these lands are occupied in Israel is a major is a major statement, right? To go and say this land is occupied. No, this is part of Eretz Israel, right? Incidentally, Hebrew is my second language, as you know, as I said earlier. So this is part of the land of Israel. And so there are increasing forces within Israeli public that considers that as land of Eretz Israel with the self-determination of the Jewish people. So that is demonstrated by taking more land, by limiting the space of the Palestinians, by harassing the Palestinians, by going to their farms and burning, and all the things that you know about. Now, there is not one single party in the Zionist spectrum in the Israeli parliament that talks about two-state solution, that talks a Palestinian state. The most they talk about is in the future we might think about that, right? They say that. So I think it's really this concept. The previous questioner asked about security and safety. The question is how to provide Israeli Jews the sense of whatever they want, safety, belonging, but also equality. That's the question, right? So with this ideology of supremacy, we are not going anywhere. I can tell you that this is the challenge that we Palestinians face, Palestinians in Israel, and I'll give you an example quickly in a minute, and Palestinians in general, and the world. The world is facing a system of supremacy. We have to recognize it, my friends. Incidentally, yeah, I just want to mention that one Arab parliamentarian put on Twitter or somewhere that he's happy that the hostages and prisoners are released. You know the reaction in Israel is what? They want to vote him out of the Knesset, of the parliament, because in their mind he equated hostages with prisoners. This is this is remarkable, right? So this is what we are facing.
Yeah. Is there still another audience question? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor. We Palestinians in the diaspora, we also have a role, I think. But my question is about what's happening in Gaza and in the West Bank. Today, for example, I think you have heard there's an operation. The Israeli army started already. They entered Jenin with the help of the Palestinian Authority. So my question, when we talk about genocide and erasure of the Palestinians from, the civil registry, we are talking also about erasing of the Palestinian identity, because you as a Palestinian living in Israel with your passport, I don't know how you are registered. let's move to Europe. When Palestinian refugees come to Europe asking for asylum, those from Gaza, the West Bank, from Lebanon, other countries, they are also erased in a way that they are not registered as Palestinian, they're registered as unknown. I don't know how much you know about this, but I feel that Europe, although the Holocaust and everything that happened, the maltreatment of the Jews who are actually European citizens, it happened in Europe. They still repeat the same, how you call it, the same process when it comes to mistreatment of other groups like the Palestinians or others. So the question is how we as Palestinians in the diaspora can be part of the solution when you talk about, the equality and, and feeling that the Jews also in Europe, the one who left Israel, there's a lot of them actually, they live now in Europe. How can we give them this sense of security? Although we don't have, we don't feel secure at the same time. This is
Right.
also the double feeling. I think you understand what I mean. Even when you have the nationality in Europe, still you are the foreigner, you are the other.
Yeah. Yes, I'm aware of what happened this morning in the Jenin camp. Before I joined this, 6 people have been killed with Israeli raid. Unfortunately, just one sentence about that is that Israel would focus now on the West Bank, not the exact same way that it did in Gaza, but with very, very harsh measures. As you know, hundreds were killed recently, thousands were imprisoned, and the settlers in the last few days attacked many. So what's happening in the West Bank is a continuation of this project of domination and erasure, right? If you want the whole land, how else can you? If you want the whole West Bank, how else can you take it? Now, for Palestinians, I think Palestinians are face like many people in the third world. Of course, there's the additional issue of the status of refugees. Incidentally, my status, like people like me, I'm an American citizen, but also I'm a citizen of Israel, which I have an Israeli passport and Israeli ID, and it's so that is the kind of formal status. But Palestinians in the West and so on are facing the problem of nativism. That's also in the Netherlands, of course, right? In many other places, the movement of nativism. The movement of nativism that this is the land of the people who were there, and there are other people who are coming from the outside and threatening our identity and way of life and so on. And it's expressed in different places in different ways. But to the extent that to the extent that's related to our topic, I think Palestinians in the diaspora in exile have a major role, and they have playing a major role. I mean, look at London and the United Kingdom. I mean, the movement in favor of decolonization is major and very important, and Palestinians are playing a significant role in it all over the West. But I think what is missing, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. What's missing, my friend, is defining what is decolonization, and Palestinians in exile can be active in defining that. Decolonization is the equal living of the two groups in that part of the homeland with equal rights and equal belonging, with the political arrangement to be discussed and agreed upon in once we accept these principles in mutually between the two groups.
I think we have time for one more audience question before wrapping up. Yeah, in the front.
Hello. So you mentioned that the Zionist project is a settler colonial, right? The settler colonialism, and a prerequisite of the Zionist project working is ethnic cleansing, right? And we've seen that ethnic cleansing has not been successful. Why? Because the Palestinians are still there. They're resisting. And many people say that genocide is the extension of a failed ethnic cleansing. And some people say that this is the final stage of Zionism. What do you think of this assessment? Are we seeing the final stage of Zionism?
What's your name?
John.
John. No, I agree with with the essence of your question. Ethnic cleansing happened in 1948. The country was closed hermetically. The West Bank, I mean, in the Oslo Agreement, some Palestinians were allowed in, but Palestinians cannot go back even to the West Bank. Palestinians in Jerusalem, I mean, ethnic cleansing can take different forms. It's not only by forcing people out like 1948. Do you know that Palestinians in Jerusalem lose their status if they are outside the country for a couple of years? They can't come back. Their status is residents. They are residents. They are not citizens. There are a couple of, a couple of thousands who are citizens. But they were given in 1967, when East Jerusalem was occupied, the status of residents. And they can lose their residency if you go to study abroad for a couple of years and you don't come back, or you go work in the Gulf and you don't. So ethnic cleansing took different forms of less Arabs, less Palestinians. It didn't work. You are right. And in order to establish the supremacy by force, you are doing what you are doing in the West Bank. You put the Palestinians under siege and they forced out, leave aside our moral judgment of what happened. We didn't talk about that. We can talk. We have no time, but you put them in prison. And then when they tried to get out with what happened on October 7, in which some measures were unacceptable measures were used, and violations and so on, you use genocide. Now, I don't know if this is going to be the last, as some people argue, the last phase of Zionism. I don't know. And I would, it depends what we mean by the last phase of Zionism. I would like to see the last phase of Zionism. I would like to see a future without Zionism, right? But that has to be clarified. That means a future with Israeli Jews as a national group living equally. That is the contrast with Zionism, right? For that to happen, it's going to be a long project. I am not with people who think that this is the last phase of Zionism. I think that's a very long international project that will take a lot of effort from everybody and from the international community. Well, why the international community is supporting West international community, not the South official, is supporting Israel is a different story. But we have to get to the West to understand that this system of supremacy cannot continue. In short, I don't think it's the last breath of Zionism. I think that Zionism, if it wants to continue on this path of supremacy, we predicted that it will use more violence, and I think genocide would be, if the world doesn't react, will be continued in different forms.
So wrapping up the interview now, just very practically, you see that a lot of people here care deeply about what is happening right now. What advice care deeply about what is happening right now, and want to see a future in which both Palestinians and Israelis can live together in this land? And so what advice from your experience would you give to us, what we can practically do?
I think I would say the same thing I would say to my friends here and students and colleagues. Let's call for a future based on equality between the two groups, abolishing supremacy, not accepting supremacy, and providing a vision where Palestinians and Israeli Jews live in that land equally, right? And not accepting any form of supremacy by any side, incidentally, right? I think this vision, if we work on it and spread it and believe in it and promote it and promulgate it, I think is very important, right? And also, I would say, that's a different story. You know what happened in the Netherlands? Well, let's leave that aside. The incident of the Israelis who came and but I think if we do that positively, if you have a speaker who comes from Israel, I know you have my colleague, ask him, is there in Zionism a branch currently? Because historically there was a small group called Bnei B'rith who wanted to live, who talked about binationalism. Is there in Israel, and it's represented in the Israeli Knesset and outside, is there a group that believes in equality? And you can tell him that I encouraged you to ask this question.
Yeah.
So this is our challenge. The challenge is really simple, that people cannot, what's his name, the African American novelist in the 60s who said, this slogan of give me liberty or give me death, if it's done by a white person, it's admirable. If it's said by a person of the third world, like Palestinians are saying, it's terrorism, right? Give me liberty, give me equality, or I don't accept all the other options. So I encourage you to think in that direction.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nadim. We will definitely bring that question to the interview on Friday. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure and very insightful to listen to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much.